A young man wakes up in the middle of the road and a storm without remembering anything. In the middle of the confusion, he hears a sweet and tender voice. At that moment, Karen in Yukai, a beautiful Tinder girl, appears. She speaks sweetly to our protagonist, telling him that she will take him home and take care of him. Our protagonist, who does not yet have a name, is completely confused when he hears these words, as he does not understand why Yukai is so kind to him. She takes him in her arms and walks in the rain to take him home, which confuses the protagonist even more, as he does not know what is going on and why his crush adopted him as if he were a pet. Upon arrival, Yukai welcomes him home and takes off his shoes. The protagonist feels flushed to see the girl he likes being so kind, as she is not so warm and sweet at school. Suddenly, another kawaii waifu appears and is revealed to be Yukai's mother, who tells her daughter that she has prepared the bathtub for her to take a bath. Yukai takes the protagonist in her arms and leaves her mother talking to herself, taking on the serious and distant personality she always displays in class. The waifu takes the protagonist to the bathroom and he does his best not to look at her as she prepares to take a bath. But obviously, he sees her in her skirt. Upon entering the shower, the protagonist discovers that, for some reason, he has turned into a dog. Then Yukai starts to play with him cheerfully in the bathtub and our protagonist feels shy. After the shower, the waifu's mother asks her daughter if her dog is capable of any tricks, which angers Yukai. As he takes the protagonist to his room, she asks him to sit down, which confuses the protagonist, as he thought she wasn't going to ask him something like that. Finally, he sits down and Yukai is overjoyed, so he decides to go for more and holds out his hand waiting for the protagonist to paw her. Remembering that he could never touch Yukai's hand when he was a human, he takes advantage and gives him his paw. Yukai is so happy to see this that he christens the protagonist, Pochita. The next day, Pochita walks around the house trying to remember the last place he visited as a human. When he reaches the door, he remembers that the last place was his room, so he desperately tries to open the door to escape and go to his room. But Yukai appears and takes him in her arms, scolding him for scratching the door. She thinks Pochita wants to go for a walk, so she puts the collar on him and decides to go out to the park. This makes the protagonist clear all his doubts and becomes aware that he is literally his waifu's dog. Once out of the house, Pochita walks shamefully through the streets because, despite being a dog, she feels ashamed to walk without clothes on public roads. After walking for a while, Yukai decides to play with Pochita and starts to run so that Pochita chases him. Suddenly, Pochita sees a ball coming in Yukai's direction, so he purposely stretches the leash and forces her to trip to save her. Yukai then thanks Pochita for saving her. At that moment, the children who deflected the ball appear and apologize. Yukai shows her Yandir's side and tells the children to be careful, but with a frightening face. Because of this, Pochita notices that she only likes dogs. Suddenly, he has the urge to pee, and the waifu notices, so she takes him to a pole so he can pee quietly. Although he feels embarrassed about relieving himself in front of his crush, he finally does it. In fact, the waifu starts taking pictures of him. Upon arriving home, Pochita starts to think about how loving Yukai is to him, so he decides to confess his feelings to her. Logically, as he tries to do so, he realizes that she only hears barking and doesn't understand a word he is trying to tell her. At that moment, Nekatani, a friend of Yukai's, enters the room. Pochita begins to wonder how a gal as shallow as Nekatani can be friends with someone like Yukai, but quickly realizes that Yukai is almost as cold as ever and is just helping Nekatani study. He begins to think that if he can get away with Nekatani, he will be able to go back home, since she is his neighbor. As Yukai leaves the room for a moment, Pochita tries to gain his trust by doing some of the tricks she charmed Yukai with. Unfortunately, his plan couldn't go any worse, as Nekatani panics at the sight of Pochita approaching. He tries to reassure her, but the barking only further upsets the waifu, who doesn't even notice the centipede slowly approaching her. Pochita tries to alert Nekatani of the centipede, but the girl runs out of the room and trips, hurting her knee. He tries to calm her down, but she thinks Pochita got angry, so she gets desperate. Seeing this, the little dog has no choice but to lick the waifu's wounds to calm her down. Although this made Nekatani trust Pochita again, it made Yukai go crazy, as she arrived at that very moment. The waifu is so crazy that she purposely stubbed her toe to make Pochita lick her wound. Then, Nekatani explained to her that Pochita got inside her clothes, so Yukai hints to her dog to do the same thing she did to her friend. To make Yukai happy, Pochita obeys. In the end, Nekatani says goodbye to Pochita, thanking her for saving her from the centipede. Yukai takes advantage of Pochita being alone and puts on animal lingerie to interact with Pochita. After playing with her dog for a while, Inyukai uses a device to interpret dog language and translate it into human language. But obviously, it doesn't work at all. Inyukai's mother suddenly enters the room, so the waifu tries to pretend, but her mother just laughs and leaves the place. She gets angry at this and asks Pochita if she considers having strange and atypical tastes to make her a weird person, which causes the protagonist to have a flashback. When the protagonist was a few years younger, he enjoyed spending time tending the garden, so the rest of the teenagers often ignored him. But one day, Inyukai appeared in his life and told him that he shouldn't mind having weird tastes, as there is nothing wrong with being different. From that moment on, the protagonist fell in love with Inyukai no matter how cold she could be. At that moment, Inyukai's phone rings, and the caller is Nekatani, who warns Inyukai that she forgot something at home, so she invites Inyukai and Pochita to her house for the weekend. The next day, Pochita worries that she was repeatedly late home all week. As soon as she got to her room, the waifu put on her pajamas and went to bed to sleep, so Pochita thinks of her plan, which is to take advantage of the visit to Nekatani's house to escape through the door and run in the direction of her house. But to do so, she must use Inyukai's cell phone to send a package to Nekatani's house and take advantage of the moment when she opens the door to escape. Upon requesting the package, Pochita discovers that Inyukai works after school to support him. As the day arrives, Pochita finally sees the outside of his house, although Inyukai takes him in his arms and carries him to Nekatina's house, where the protagonist must carry out his plan. Before entering the house, he sees a railing that he must jump over to get out of Nekatina's house. The waifu opens the doors of her house for Inyukai and his dog to enter inside. Nekatina tells her friend that they have some free time before they start studying, so they both start playing video games. Meanwhile, Pochita tries to escape, since his owner removed his collar and leash, but when he was about to run to the door, Inyukai grabs him by the tail. He manages to escape anyway, but now it is Nekatina who stands in the way of his escape. Fortunately, the package Pochita ordered the night before arrives, so the protagonist seizes the moment and desperately flees. As the railing is too high to jump over, Pochita tries to scare Nekatina into throwing him over just like the other day. His plan works perfectly and he manages to reach his destination. But a new obstacle appears in his way. Usagi Tsukishiro, the pink-haired waifu who had appeared in his flashback. It turns out that she is in love with the protagonist and her obsession is so great that she sneaks into his room to touch his things and remember him. He sees a box of Valentine's Day chocolates and remembers that the last thing he had done as a human was to eat one of those chocolates that a waifu gave him. The protagonist's mother appears and tells Usagi that it is late and she should go home, and offers to take her back. But the waifu thanks her and tells her that she will walk back. Having enough information, Pochita decides to leave with the waifu, but after walking a few moments, the waifu discovers him and decides to adopt him. Upon arriving at Usagi's house, Pochita realizes that she is sick. In fact, Usagi ends up fainting from the fever. He tries to help her at all costs, so he takes off her wet clothes and rummages through the waifu's room to cover her with dry clothes. At that moment, Usagi and Nekatani appear and Pochita realizes that the girl who loves him in dog form and the girl who loves him in her human form will meet for the first time. After this, Pochita starts having a flashback of her last moments as a human. While he was about to take something out of his locker, a waifu handed him a chocolate as a Valentine's Day gift. Supposedly, that chocolate had been sent by Inyukai, so the protagonist did not hesitate to take it home. The last thing he remembers is eating the chocolate and feeling dizzy to the point of fainting. For this reason, he decides that he must find that waifu at any cost to recover his human body. While he was thinking, the waifus were taking care of Usagi, but when she wakes up, Usagi tries to convince them that Pochita belongs to her, so the two of them engage in a strange and disturbing competition to decide who will keep the dog. Finally, Pochita leaves with Inyukai since Usagi cheated. Also, Inyukai reveals to Nekatani that Pochita has a tracker in her body. Pochita realizes that the only way to find the scientist waifu is to go to school again, so he tries to infiltrate Inyukai's backpack. But Inyukai finds out. He starts doing things to make the waifu tender and get her to take him to school. Finally, she ends up taking him to class. As the class thinks of an idea for the school festival, Pochita sees the scientific waifu passing by, so she looks for a way to escape from Inyukai's bag. When he finally manages to do so, he runs through the entire classroom dodging the rest of the girls. But unfortunately, he is caught by one of them. To prevent Inyukai from getting angry and not taking him to school anymore, he manages to get the attention of all the girls, who decide that the school festival can have a dog theme. The next day, all the waifus take their dogs to school so that they can start to get used to the classroom and practice for the day of the festival. After an embarrassing situation in which the dogs almost leave Nekatani as she came into the world, Pochita helps her flee from the hallway so that no one will see her. At that moment, she thanks him for his consideration and shows him a photo, telling him that Inyukai had a dog named Pochita before. He died several years ago, and since then Inyukai has never been happy again. In addition, Nekatani reveals that she and Inyukai have been friends since they were little. Inyukai shows up to bring Nekatani some new clothes and helps her get dressed. Then, Inyukai shows Nekatani the decorations she made for the festival, but she starts to feel unmotivated immediately, so Pochita runs to the living room to paint her paw prints and leave them marked on Inyukai's decorations. Inyukai drops these decorations in front of the whole class, so they discover her talent and congratulate her, which causes the waifu to blush, and Pochita is happy to help her. In the end, Yuzagi appears in the classroom dressed as a bunny and tells them that her classroom will host a bunny-themed cafe, which sparks a dispute between the two waifus who fight over the main character. The day of the festival arrives and the waifus prepare a big event at the salon, so they receive many customers. But suddenly, they stop coming. Then, one of the girls in the class discovers that all the customers are going to Yuzagi's salon, which organized a rabbit-themed festival. As a solution, Inyukai proposes to give a foot bath service, but let the dogs be in charge of serving the customers. This is a great success, as it attracts lots and lots of customers. Even the strange woman Pochita has been waiting for so long shows up. She sits in one of the chairs and asks Inyukai for a coffee with lots of sugar, while she demands a foot massage from Pochita. When the waifu returns with the coffee, she begins to psychologically torture her by asking her what she would feel if she found out that her beloved dog Pochita is actually a human. This shocks Inyukai, so Pochita tries to distract the woman with a foot massage. When the woman leaves the place, Pochita follows her everywhere, until she arrives at the old school building, where the strange woman introduces herself as Inari Sakihira.